Thanks for joining here for the sessions. Of course, great news today. Dean Chang just posted it out. We are now number 6 in entrepreneurship nationwide, I think, and number 3 among public universities. So it's a long haul, but we're getting there. So everybody who's involved actively or as a recipient of great entrepreneurial support, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I think we're definitely hitting the big leagues here. All right, so my session today, Alex asked me to pick a topic that I think would be interesting. Some of you may know me, but my background is, my name is Oliver Schlake. I'm a professor here at UMD. I teach entrepreneurship for 15, 16 years now. And but I'm also involved in other things like strategy, corporate venturing, etc. And my background way before these days at UMD was I was a professional futurist. That used to be a cool job title, and I have ever since included the professional outlook and working with companies to help them see what's next. That has always been part of my life and my work. And so in these times, we worked a lot with UMD or Maryland businesses. We created something called Maryland Reboot at the business school. It's a series of workshops for small, mid-sized businesses. And I did a similar session there, but I customized it. So what we're going to talk today is about how to read the future. I mean, how to do this professionally, and hopefully also to use that skill to adapt and create what I call is a plan B, both for your business and for your life. So a lot of things going on. Of course, we have a big set of problems here, and businesses are hurting. Startups are hurting. Some of them are on hold, and some of them reevaluate whether their business model is still there. But businesses, they just will they survive? I heard a lot of business owners who use their own cash to keep the lights on, even paying their people out of pocket to go ahead. We spoke to a paint business, and the owner basically had their people continue to be paid, but now he had them paint their in-laws' house. He had their own house painted, just to keep everybody going. But now the big question for many is, what's next? What will the world look like after the pandemic? And also, will my business be relevant when this is happening? Is my business model still valid? So a lot of problems are around and are difficult. So there's a lot of need to what I call to adapt in the face of what we see. Now, the problem that we're all facing is that the fear of the unknown is something that is totally natural to us as human beings. It's evolutionary, right? We have this in our genes, and the reason is because we have to kind of always be in control. Anything that is out of control, especially earlier in our evolution, means usually danger, right? And so we've learned to deal with that, and not always in a very good way. And nowadays, in our culture, it's always something where we can't even admit that we're fearing things. But ignorance, like we say, it's not a bliss right now. So our ancestors developed a couple of mechanisms to deal with this kind of situation, with the idea of fear. One of the things we developed when we are facing a difficult situation is a mechanism called the freeze, flight, fight, or forfeit mechanism. And so when uncertainty hits, when change hits, when danger hits, we try to freeze, right? The deer in the headlight moment. Then we try to run out of the situation. If we can't run away, then we eventually have to turn around and try to fight it. And if that doesn't help, we just forfeit. To put this into much easier words, if you're an outdoor person, there's a similar mechanism when you encounter a bear, and it goes like, if the bear is black, fight back. If the bear is brown, lay down. And if the bear is white, good night. And it's the same thing. It's the adaptation of that mechanism, right, based on the color of the bear you encounter. But in this situation, if you are, facing it yourself for a startup, for a business, if you're in the leadership position there, you must be careful that people don't go into this downward spiral when facing with challenges, and this can easily happen, right? It could be employees, but it could be even the business owner themselves, her or himself, going down that spiral, and that is natural. And so we need to fight that. The way we can fight this is, and humans have an enormous ability to adapt, and that's what we're all trying to do right now. We all adapt in our own kind of ways, and that is the other, basically the exit from the uncertainty road, if you will. You can go into the downward spiral, or you can take an upward spiral. And the upward spiral is that we all should think about and kind of embrace. It's the ability to adapt. It's companies who are changing the way they do business, restaurants changing the way they operate, and so many other business owners and people having kind of found a way to adapt. Adaptation is one of our strongest suits, and it allows us to overcome a lot of things, but it can only set place when we have the ability to not go into the downward spiral. And so the benefit, and I'm speaking now as an entrepreneur mostly, there's an enormous benefit and opportunity here that comes across. Now, it may not seem like it, and it's definitely not a moment to celebrate, but from an entrepreneurial standpoint, this type of rupture that we've seen in our operations, in our businesses, all over the place, usually leaves a lot of opportunities. First of all, established competitors that might have prevented you from entering a market in the first place, they're leaving the market. They are, there's market share to capture. They're leaving the market because they go out of business, or they're not interested anymore, etc., or they can't adapt. The other thing is long established consumer habits. Customers are willing to experiment. Look at us now here in this framework. We are all getting used to running everything on video. 8 months ago, I wouldn't have been comfortable to having everybody see me every day. Have to get ready for prime time, right? And there are a lot of businesses who are adapting in some way. Last night I heard about a startup. I think it's called Bev. It's a canned wine business. So it's kind of a new hip startup that puts wine into cans, like beer cans. And the interesting part that they are doing well right now is not only do people order like 400% more alcohol online, which it's in itself an interesting number, but pardon me. But we're also seeing these companies who are making canned wine. They are now pushing the canned wine into the online orders of restaurants. So because restaurants don't have the ability to kind of put wine in a cup and then having takeout, so canned wine is now the way to go for many of those restaurants, right? We have a lot of things that we are adapting. We're adapting to school. Commuting is kind of a thing that probably changes. Remote work. We even have comedians who change the way they make business. There's a startup that came up a few months ago where you can rent a stand-up comedian to spice up your Zoom meeting. So it's, I don't know, rent a comedian or something, or Zoom medians, something like this. And so if you look back a little bit, not too far, but something still within reach, there were plenty of businesses that were started in 2008 and after 2008, and those have become now familiar household names. WhatsApp, Venmo, Pinterest, Uber, all of those businesses came out of a really shaken up economy, and what it did for a lot of people is it changed an established behavior that people didn't have before. I mean, Airbnb grew a lot because people were really in search of income opportunities and were willing to open the doors to strangers which they otherwise wouldn't have done. Uber, which was in general just a side gig. I mean, the concept of Uber was a side gig for people who have an hour or two every day to drive. It became a full-time profession for many people out of necessity. And so that's kind of interesting to look at, that these crises and changes can actually be quite be a source of opportunity. Now, there are very few businesses who had what I would call a plan B in place. And I want to talk about the idea of the plan B first. First of all, what is really a plan B for your business or for your life? First of all, a plan B is created while you are executing plan A. That means if you have a plan A for your life or for your business, that's the perfect time to create a plan B. And the plan B has to be as detailed and actionable as possible, because it has to replace plan A when needed. And so when do you need the plan B? Well, when the assumptions of your plan A are no longer valid, when the world around you changes, when the market changes, industries, consumer behavior, anything that is vital for your plan A, if that is not in place, then you should have a plan to deal with that situation. This is considered a plan B. But every plan that you make after your plan A fails is not a plan B. You hear this when people talk about plan B and say, hey, I now need a plan B. No. At that moment, you need a new plan A. The plan B is something you should have had already, right? That's the beauty of the plan B. It is there for you. And so if you apply this to your career, to your students here in the talk, if you're looking at what are my opportunities out there, well, you still have your plan A, whatever your dream job, where you want to go career wise. But this is the perfect time, hopefully, when you have the capacity, when you have a little bit calmness, to build up this plan B while you are not needing it, because everything else that is created when panic sets in is not a real plan anymore. It's just messing around with a crisis. So that's why you want to have a plan B in place. The fact is also that most plan A's, or let's call them strategies for the moment, even if you have it, even under the best of circumstances, they usually do not survive what we call contact with the enemy. It's a quote from General von Clausewitz, a German, or Prussian to be a precise general, who was a great strategic thinker. If you're not too into history, I'll throw in a Mike Tyson quote that says everybody had a strategy until they got hit. Right? And so it means that even under the best circumstances, your plan A will not always work. We don't need a pandemic to be forced or encouraged to have a plan B. So you should always have something prepared when things are not being so well. And if you ever fall into a YouTube habit and watch Mike Tyson's Mike Tyson's fights, it's unbelievable what happened to these people who all thought they had a shot, and they didn't. So before we get into the detail of a plan B, there are certain things that are even more important, and that's the continuous planning. So a plan B can also come from a continuously updating and researching and where the world is going. We tend to be getting lazy and not paying attention when things are going well. It's a typical human behavior that we don't feel the urge to plan ahead when things are doing well. Strategic planning, problem solving, all of these things are anti-cyclical. That means we only tend to engage in that when things are really bad. Instead, we should change that and plan continuously, not just when things are bad and need to be shifted, but especially in good times. So building a plan B is not just a one-time event. It's a continuous update of what else you could do if needed. So a good plan B can help you to look forward in the future. That's the whole point. It's a skill set and an art, if you will, and a way to approach life, that your plan B should help you with an alternative view of how the world is going to come along, right? Most of the time, our plan A is the ideal approach. Where do we want where do you want our career develop, where do we want our startup to develop, etc. But it's just too risky to just operate on this ideal future. The world usually turns out differently, and therefore a good plan B can include and should include a different outlook. Things that are not happening the way we predict. People are now talking about what's the new normal, right? Well, it's probably very different than we think, uh, but we can at least anticipate how this new normal could look like, right? It doesn't mean that we have to predict it, but in every industry, in every profession, there's a set of what we call early warning signs or kind of trends that come up. Christmas shopping can be predicted by how the sales on corrugated paper are, because that's kind of the raw material for shipping boxes, right? New home building can be defined by how much paint people are purchasing. Right? You can look at consumer credit behavior to predict the market. So everybody tries to at least get a little bit trend. And so a good plan B would probably include a 3 to 5 year forecast. That sounds like a strange activity, because who can predict 3 to 5 years? But it's a one way to incorporate where the world might be when you cannot exactly predict it. And your plan B should be something that is proactive. It cannot be created during an emergency, like we said, and therefore it needs to have a set of priorities that prepare you for a future that is not the one that you expect. So the first step in creating a plan B is to have an idea: how does the world look like in 3 to 5 years, differently from what I usually expect? So do we expect COVID to just go away and then we're going to back to normal and we are going to be just regular on campus? We're going to go all about our lives. We're going to have cruise ships. We're going to have all the good stuff that we had before. That is usually life has a tendency to go back to a certain state. Now, the question is, will we go back to that? Right? Will we ever have the opportunity to go back? And if you have a little bit of an inkling in the back of your mind and say, maybe this is not the case, then it is time, and it's high time, to build an idea of where the world could be going, other than back to what we are used to. Going back to what we're used to is an option, but it's not the only option. So therefore, everyone, for your personal life, for your business, you should be in the business of creating those alternative future. You should be looking at this. I'm going to skip this here for a moment. So what can we do here? So how can you get started, and how can you put together something like a plan B? And so my background, that this has nothing to do with academia, is in as my lifelong hobby. I am not a political, but a survivalist. I'm not a guy who tries to overthrow the government. I'm just a person who enjoys bushcraft, being outdoors, camping, all the good stuff. And I have been a survival trainer in the German army, and have been trained and trained a lot of people. And when you do survival training, that is usually something you hope that you will never need, right? So it's when you see Naked and Afraid, the show on Discovery, or any of these survival shows, if you ever came across one, this is actually something that realistically you don't want to ever encounter. So even though I have training of what to do, when you are out in the ocean and your ship sinks and how you survive there, I'm not really into that this is going to happen. And therefore, it's a lot of training. And what we learn in survival training is a set of timelines and priorities. So if something goes wrong, hiking outside or getting lost, and we heard a lot of news recently of people getting lost in national parks because they're all out, want to hike and want to avoid COVID and so forth. And so when something happens, that usually means that your plan A has been failed. You wanted to hike, you wanted to take a break and then come back to your car, and in between something happened. You broke yourself an ankle, you lost orientation because you didn't have a map, you relied on your GPS, but the phone with the GPS died, and so forth and so forth. So, everything can happen. That basically means your plan A is done, right? Plan A has failed. Now, in survival training, we, of course, first of all, try to not ever have this happen to us, right? So we take every precaution. We will carry a map. We know how to use a compass. We tell people that where we are going, and then we tell people that we have returned, and so forth. So there's a whole litany of things we do. But just in case it happens, and here's the kind of, we use a kind of a rule of thumb here, and then this is called the rule of threes. And the rule of threes means there are things in a plan B situation that we need to prioritize. And this is kind of something that this rule of threes is it's godlike. It's something you cannot mess with. And so the rules go, first of all, you cannot be without hope for 3 seconds. So that's the first three. If you are without hope for 3 seconds, you're done. Hope is what kills most people in this scenario. When people give up, that's when things are bad. The second three is 3 minutes. You cannot be without oxygen for 3 minutes. You cannot be without shelter for more than 3 hours. And if the conditions are harsh, you cannot be without water on average for 3 days. You cannot be without food for 3 weeks. I probably can easily be without food for 4 weeks or 5 weeks if I look at myself here during COVID. And then generally, you cannot be without company for more than 3 months. That's when people go nuts, right? They're missing company to a degree. And so these rules of threes, what it means is it gives us a way to prioritize when we are in a situation where we need to create a plan B. Now, this is, of course, way too late. It's in an emergency, and therefore we have this rule of three. But we can apply this to a normal situation, to a business situation, even for a lifelong situation when we are in a not so ideal situation. The way to do this, and this is hopefully, this is a busy slide, but it's basically a work session here. This is basically a breakdown of the rules of three into a business environment. And this could be an advice, not just for a business owner, but it could also be a personal advice. And what you do to create your first set of plan Bs is to break down any kind of situation into time chunks. You look at what the next week is happening, what next month, next quarter, next year, and then a new normal would look like. And the way this is working is, especially when you have a larger organization, you want to make sure that the most senior people spend most of their time in the longer term horizons. This is not the time where you as a business owner, as a CEO, etc., spend so much time on the next week, next month area. This is not something you want to have people taking care of. If you have employees, you want to have them taking care of that. Now, let's translate this for a moment into a personal plan B. In a situation like this, we tend to be very much involved in the here and now, right? Because we need to fix problems, we need to do this, we need to do that. There's an issue here. But ideally, you try to move as much of your time into the later stages. So this would be an ideal time, if you can, to think more about the next quarter, the next year, in the new normal. Try to find ways to eliminate some of the problems that are, creeping up daily, creeping up weekly, so that you can free yourself and think about the long term. It sounds anti-cyclical, and it is, right? In a situation like this, it is mostly beneficial to think about long term. If you look at professional development, what is my job? Do I need to create another source of income, et cetera, et cetera? And you can take some of the emerging panic away. For example, instead of going to shop every other day, you may just go out there and load up the car, and then you don't have to shop for a week or two to get that issue out of your mindset. So this is one way to break down your timeline in order to start creating a good and better plan B. All right. So let's take a quick look at what I call COVID-inspired Plan A and Plan B. So let's put this more into practical work here. So the Plan A that most people are looking at during this time is the recover and get back to business. It's called what I call Plan A thinking, right? People want to start rebuilding the the pre-pandemic economy. We want to hopefully get the unemployment out, et cetera, et cetera. That is what I call Plan A thinking, and that's okay. You can stick with this. But I see a lot of challenges here, right? There are a lot of flaws in business models that have been creeping up for the pandemic. It's not necessarily that the pandemic was the cause of the collapse, but it showed that certain businesses were really operating at margins, right? Things were very, very difficult for them in the first place, and it worked while the economy was doing fine. If you look back at March, it took less than 2 weeks or so to rake up the unemployment rate. That is crazy. In 2 weeks, many of these, brands and businesses that were still in existence all of a sudden collapsed. And therefore, for this, I highly recommend what I would call Plan B thinking. And that needs to be, an honest assessment. Are these, certain business models, are they viable in a distressed economy, right? Is this something that works? Our supply chains were working enough, and are they solid enough? With people thinking again about supply chain troubles. The idea of toilet paper shortage that we have is absolutely ridiculous, and it shows how sensitive these supply chains can be. A Walmart has only goods in the Walmart for 72 hours. If a Walmart does not get supplies in 70 hours, it starts to run out of pretty much everything. And some of you may have seen this when they were out. So we need to see how are these supply chains working? Is this possible? Is the gig economy something that can endure? Can all these delivery models, do they continuously work? So that's kind of my Plan B thinking. I would question that if I would be in any of those industries and would take a close look. Another Plan A thinking is what we call crisis management. It means that there's a perfectly normal response to refocus all of our resources on the crisis, and crisis management, put it on top of the agenda. And then also we are, of course, wanting to celebrate the people who get us out of the crisis. Time Magazine People of the Day, maybe the medical staff in every hospital should do this. But I think it's the wrong approach. It's probably what's happening, and we will have all these stories coming up where people get honored for what they did during the crisis. But that's Plan A thinking. For me, in Plan B thinking, let's rethink the whole way we approach this. I believe we have to redefine who are heroes, and I think we need to shift our focus and our attention to what I call first predictors and not first responders. There's nothing wrong with people to respond, and I appreciate what they're doing. But a lot of people were thrown into this situation that could have been avoided. And so it has also to do with our culture. We love to have people who rescue us, right? The hero. We love to have the fireman who rescues the girl out of the burning house, but we never give credit to the janitor who, in the house next door, changed the 9-volt battery of the smoke detector every year, and so this house didn't have that problem. The fire engine could arrive on time. So we should rethink whether anticipation is a new skill versus reaction. Another thing that we are probably going to look for is that companies go back to profitability and optimization, right? We try to get our supply chains in order. We make sure that a better prediction system is in place, and we want to squeeze out every dollar out of the supply chain, and that's okay, and that's where we end up. That's where we came from. But I think the pandemic also gives us an opportunity to put a plan B thinking into play. What none of these business, or very few business, had was a redundancy and resiliency plan, right? They were very sensitive. 2 weeks into the crisis, most of them collapsed. The business models they have and the supply chains were not adaptable. They had only one way to operate. So my plan B thinking is, let's think about how our organizations could operate in a different way. How can we focus on resiliency? How can we, put rainy day funds up? And how can we, instead of having one supplier that gives us the best price, how can we diversify with multiple suppliers? So if one goes down, a secondary supplier may come up. We will also see a lot of efforts being done to fix the pandemic, and we have stockpiling, protection equipment, maybe have pandemic drills. Hopefully people look into health monitoring more carefully. Like UMD, we have to take a test before we even come on campus, and that's all good, and that's how we usually deal with a catastrophe in hindsight. But my plan B thinking is, we cannot prepare for all eventualities. And so instead, we need to think about the skill sets that would help us to deal with a situation like this. And what you see on the screen is kind of symbols for flexibility. Swiss Army knife, duct tape, and WD-40. These are the most versatile tools you could have around that help you to deal with uncertainty. And we can translate this to our own skill set. I'd like to teach, and I teach a lot in flexibility, in improvisation, adaptability, cross-functionality. Those skill sets are often called soft skills and therefore somewhat degraded, right? We're all about analytics and data. But when you tell people, hey, how are your improvisation skills? How are you able to adapt? How can you kind of switch operating procedures quickly? And I think this is where my plan B definitely goes to. Then I'm trying to acquire more of those soft skills in order to be more flexible when whatever catastrophe comes, right? We're probably good for the next pandemic because everything is now geared toward that. But what about other things that we haven't done something for? What if the internet severely goes down, right? What if your cell phone gets hacked in a way that you can't even repair? Those of you with an Android phone, you probably heard about this exploit that allows you not even to reset your phone anymore, just permanently can be damaged, etc., etc. What if we will never be able to prepare for all of that? That would be out of range, but we can prepare ourselves in our businesses to be much more flexible. Yeah, and then for small business here for a second, the normal response is now for small business, see where are the big guys going, where's the train going, where is the economy heading, and usually small businesses are good enough to step in and follow and pick up some of these trends and jump in and supply. I think this is a great time to do something different. I think small businesses, entrepreneurs that are in the room and here in the conference have almost an obligation to anticipate the future and show us where that future can be and where it might go. Because smaller businesses and mid-sized businesses have more agility. The big businesses don't have the agility. They're like a Titanic heading to the iceberg. They will not be able to do this easily. And so I rely really on small businesses, mid-sized businesses to to cover some of that. And we've done a couple of webinars already on that topic to help companies to do that. All right, and yeah, we have a few more minutes, and so I want to share with you maybe one or two tools that you might want to develop or think about when dealing with the future. And one of the first ones that is the kind of the classic is what we call trend watching. And this is picking up things that happen, and when you read them, it sounds like, I never knew that, right? This is usually unexpected things. And you may not know this, but it is very hard to get a freezer right now in the United States. The United States is more or less sold out on freezers because people use them to store meat. They were sold in March, April, And now when you have Black Friday and all of the things, usually appliances are always on sale. It's not happening. There's such a demand on freezers, you can get it. Now, this is, if you were in the market for a freezer, this is not a good news, and it might be expensive, or you have long wait times. But this to me is a trend. So what happened to all of these freezers now? People have freezers. Can we develop some ideas? Maybe you can maybe you jump in here for a second in the chat, and if you think about it, what kind of business ideas come to your mind when you have more and more Americans now having a freezer in their house than they ever had? Maybe somebody has an idea. I'll tell you my idea that I thought about, and this comes from the 1970s. In 1970 Germany, we had a guy called the snowman. That was the business they called it, the Iceman or the Snowman. And it was basically a delivery truck, and that delivery truck exclusively delivered frozen goods. I'm not sure if this, I haven't seen it here. It's probably not a thing because most people go out and eat, and it's just in time. But in Germany, people traditionally have a lot of freezer space. And so if I see this here in America, well, maybe this might be, you know, the next Uber Eats, or the next, I don't know, the service from Giant, right? The Peach or whatever, the delivery service from Giant is, I don't know if they do frozen food. Most people don't do this. But this is a good opportunity to think about a new business that specifically delivers frozen goods, because they're usually thought out or thought of when they do this. Jay has an idea. Frozen chocolate chip cookie dough. Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's a good idea. You know, and people staying at home, so they're baking. You know, it's fresh out of the thing. And this guy in Germany had pretty much everything frozen. You know, even like Jake said, you know, even chocolate dough, cakes, frozen cakes, a lot of these croissants and stuff, and then ton of stuff. You know, and so that to me is, you know, that's where I pay attention, right? That could be a trend. But we have a lot of other things that are happening. You know, restaurants who now starting in the delivery business, and you know, you pay attention. And this is what a professional futurist would do. And then we start playing with it, right? What does it mean? What happened to these freezers? Is there a business maybe for repair or for caretaking? Can I sell maybe freezer labeling or freezer organizers, because these box freezers are very hard to organize? Do this. Can I make an app that scans everything that goes into my freezer, and then I know what kind of stuff I have in my app, and when I run out of something, then my app tells me to reorder this. You know, the thing that most people think about with their fridge, now you have to do it with the freezer. And freezer is much more effective for that, because it's very difficult to rummage through your freezer. You know, so that's trend watching, and you always want to jump into this and look into areas that maybe not 100% your area. And so for us futurists, what we do is we use these frameworks, and these are what I call 8 large categories, and these categories allow us to organize our thoughts, right? This could be the 8 super categories that we're using to find out, okay, what are the trends in tech, what are the trends in business, environment, etc. So this is one of the tools that we like to use. And this is an ongoing collection. You never stop. You always start to read and bring in new ideas. Some people in the early days when I worked, we had really file folders for all of these ideas. Nowadays, you have maybe a good way to categorize this on the web, etc. So that's trend watching. That's one of the slides. And the other tool that I like to use is called strategic early warning. And it's basically a process by which you are getting much more sensitive for what's happening around you, and consider things like a trend or like changes as a weak signal. So historically, that's, I'm going to explain the image here for a second. This is a coal miner, right? Dirty guy, just came out of the shaft, and what he holds in his hand is his life insurance. It's a canary bird, And until the 1980s, many coal miners had canary birds. It's not that they're particularly birdy people, but canary birds are very sensitive, especially they're sensitive to carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide concentrations. And so every coal miner or group of coal miners had a little birdie in the cage here, and they took it down in the coal mine, and they watched it carefully. And the moment this bird fell over and was actually dead, the coal miners knew it is high time to leave the mine because the concentration of deadly gases were at a point that the bird fell over. And that was their life insurance or their early warning sign, right? It showed them that they still had time to react, and they had a better chance of making it out alive. And so you want to think about this for yourself or for your business. What are the early warning signs that you need to listen to, right? And there are plenty of examples when people ignored early warning signs. You know, we had Titanic. Titanic had a lot of early warning signs. People usually don't look at this; they only look at the iceberg. The iceberg was just the end of a chain. The Titanic had 6 major incidents before it even left for the maiden voyage. And all of these incidents had to do with the inability of the crew, including the captain, to accurately maneuver the Titanic. Some of you may have heard the theory: if the Titanic would have just driven straight into the iceberg, the damage would have been much less. And so it showed people in hindsight that the crew, including the captain, were just not able to maneuver the ship, and it didn't have any idea about breaking points and the way it stops and the way it turns, etc., etc. So they hadn't had enough experience, and it should have been an early warning sign to abort. But business pressure was so strong that it never happened. Challenger, the O-ring story, some of you seen that, where there was a lot of research done that the Challenger should have not flown into space when the temperature in the morning in Florida was below, I don't know, 40 degrees or something, you know. And believe it or not, Blockbuster didn't see the early warning sign. They were actually offered or asked by Netflix to be bought by them. So much for that story. So how does it work? How does early warning work in a practical sense? So I want to show you here a little bit of content that hopefully explains it. Um, you see here a chart, and the blue line that I'm putting up here quickly is a line of any kind of signal, of any warning signal that may pop up. The easiest translation to you personally is your tongue goes around your mouth and finds a little hole in the tooth, right? And that's an early warning sign. It's not too bad. You're not going to die right away. It's not going to be too bad, but it's kind of an early warning sign. And what we usually do is we ignore it, right? Because who wants to go to the dentist, right? And so the signal comes, and then we know, of course, we're all smart. We know the earlier I go to the dentist, the higher the chances for intervention, right? This could be easily patched, just a 10-minute job, nothing big. Yeah, it's still uncomfortable, but I could have fixed it. But our threshold of awareness, that's the dotted line that you see here, is so high that the blue line and the threshold level just meet very late, right? This is when we detect the signal. Basically, that is when the hole is so big that even our tongue and ourself, we say, no, now we got to go. And it's usually involving pain of some sort, because otherwise there wouldn't have been a reason to go to the dentist. Now, then you make an appointment, and then you hopefully get an appointment, so it takes some time, and it starts to really hurt before you actually get it fixed. Now, in business, that is the same thing. If a business sees that an industry is changing, consumer behavior is changing, and if your threshold level of awareness is so high that you don't pay enough attention, you're getting the message basically too late. You will be out of business before you can intervene. And so this goes for businesses, but it also goes for your personal life. Whatever strategy and career you have, look at this, and as part of your plan B, pay more attention where these industries are heading, right? Not just in a negative way, but also look at the things that are coming up that are going to be more interesting. So In order to get better at this, to do what a futurist like me does, is we are lowering our threshold level. Let me see. You saw this here. Now, when I lower my threshold level, that means I'm paying more attention. I'm more sensitive. I actually read the article about the freezer shortage and other things to do. So, so where do you look for trends? Well, that's a good question here from David. Where do you find this? I like to look, and this is, hopefully no, it's recorded, so I have to be careful. But I look at the immoral, at the illegal, at the weird, at the strange, at the fringes. So if your network of people doesn't involve any crazy or weird people, it's very hard to be a futurist. You got to have some people who are in whatever discipline are at the forefront. This could be researchers, this could be artists, this could be sports people, that could be, entrepreneurs with new ideas. So it's not a bad group here to think about this. But what we need to do is, once you have the resources, you also need to talk to these people and see what they think where we're heading. And so for the most part, when you see this, none of the mainstream media, none of the TV channels, even newspapers have a hard time to capturing this. This is information, the good stuff is hidden. To give you an idea, the people who developed the mechanism to make payments with credit cards over the internet possible, these guys were running a X-rated image website. They were basically copying Playboy and Penthouse magazines in the early 90s and putting those images on a server, and then they developed the system so that people can buy these images with a credit card. It's a movie about this. Is a true story, and that's and this is early on, so this is a strange area. People used the people who used pagers professionally really were not business people. These were drug dealers. If you watch the movie The Wire, in Germany, the first adopters for mobile phones were pimps, people who were in that business. Yeah, it was not good a thing. But the reason why I'm saying this is, you want to look at areas where very few people look, and where people have a much lower, a much higher rate of adoption of something, because it's critical for them to adopt, right? And so if you can find those strange areas to get this information, it is a little bit of training involved, but it's also, do you pay attention? Because we are reading a lot of things, we're seeing a lot of things, but we stop paying attention. And so if you pay attention, there's one benefit. That means you can detect a signal much, much earlier. And when you detect the signal earlier, there's a higher chance of intervention, right? And so ask yourself, when did you go out in February or March and stock up your pantry? Because kind of the crisis was evolving, and it was kind of about to see, and if you went out not before end of March, then your threshold level is very high and you didn't pay enough attention. And and if you had no toilet paper in the house, that's even worse, because toilet paper is something you can have at any given time. It doesn't go bad. This gets me to another idea, because when I researched this toilet paper situation, I realized that a lot of people don't store toilet paper because it takes up a lot of volume. So I was even thinking of creating a toilet paper that is a low volume toilet paper. Just a toilet paper roll that is very tightly rolled, and then maybe vacuum packed, so you get 3 times as much in the same space. But then you can also use industrial toilet paper, which is also very dense. Yeah, so just my time is almost up here. When you kind of organize your thinking like this, when you're trying to capture these early information, that is a good chance for you to see potential industries pop up, to be ahead of these trends, and that informs your plan B, and you can be much more effective in doing so. All right. just in case, I don't want to go through this to this here in total, but if you are interested in this here, this is kind of my strategic action items, the thing that I told about. If you're interested in getting a copy of that, just send me a quick email. I'll consider it. It's a PDF file, but it's kind of a starter tool, if you will, to get your plan B involved. So just send me a quick info and I can send you. Jay had a question here. How do you think about it? Yeah, so there is a certain let's call it you know, you have to balance the ability to pick up more and the what futurists or people who are in this kind of foresight business are, what you need to be able to, and this is a skill over time, you need to be able to juggle multiple ideas at the same time, and you need to be able to comb through a lot of uh, um, information that is not as crystal clear as a data analysis. You know, there's a lot of degree of uncertainty with this information, and so the more you consume, but you start to get better, and you also have a confirmation mechanism. When you see information and it turned out to be, yes, I was right on, then you know this information was good information. But it takes a little bit of, it's a little bit distractive. You have to be comfortable with this level of ambiguity. That's kind of the price to pay to be ahead of time, right? So if you want to be always right, you probably last, or you're coming late. But if you are willing to be sometimes late, if you be sometimes not right, but at the chance of being early, that's kind of the way it works. Yeah, so that's all the time I have for you. We have a few more minutes, so I'm happy to entertain a couple more questions and in the chat, or I'm going to stick around at the conference for a little while more. But yeah, that's all I have here on the topic of Plan B. And really, my encouragement: if you don't have a Plan B for your business or for yourself, and you're still doing okay during COVID, and you're not in a panic mode, it's a good time to think about an alternative path forward, both for your business and for yourself. So that's all I have, guys. And there are no more questions. Just use the chat, direct communicate with me. Happy to see several of my students here. Thanks for making this work. How often do you spend time? Uh, it's it's ongoing, David. It's something that you can't, once you start it, once you get excited about this, and once you see the benefit for your own kind of activities, you constantly do it, and it becomes a habit. I mean, for myself, I read about 2 to 3 hours every night on multiple platforms. Um, this is not always trend information, but it is kind of fringe information from various groups. You can even set up your kind of Reddit profile where you have, you need to be careful that you're not listening to complete nonsense. But I think you develop a certain ability to filter it out when something is not. And you don't have to accept this as truth. You also need this information to kind of get your imagination going, and then you can follow up and see, okay, is this new lifestyle? Is this something? Many years we talked about what's the next generation doing, Generation Z and whatever. And we try always to kind of paste it with a large brush. But when you look into that, this is much more diverse. People have different lifestyles. They have different wants and needs, and there's once you get started, you can spend a lot of time in it. And for my job, it's also part of the job related. I make it a habit to be a little bit ahead of time. Many of the entrepreneurs here that we have at UMD that start something, they have found a kind of trend where they say, here's an opportunity that comes from not many people seeing this trend or not seeing the trend early on. So anybody who has ever seen that for themselves, you have done this for a very specific end. The difference between doing this for your business only and doing this more globally is to just broaden up your horizon and peek into multiple things. One of the things that I can give you as a tip here, if you want to if you want to discover more and more trends, look at demographics. It's just a very, very powerful tool, often underutilized. For example, companies like Nike and Adidas, they're using this in order to find out where the next product push is. You know, what kind of sports do, let's say, does the next college generation in 4 or 5 years, what kind of sports do they like, right? Do you go and ask those college kids right now what they think is going to be the next sport? No, you don't do that. So you think about it. If I want to know what's happening in 5 years, where do I go? I go to a middle school, right? I'm going to go looking for middle schoolers who are, my future customers, and that's where you might find this information. Um, Adidas, or Adidas as we call it in Germany, they are actually engaging with elementary schools. Of course, they cannot send service to the kids, but they are going to, send these donations to PE teachers, and then they ask them at the end of the school year, hey, which of the games or which of the equipment we gave you was best perceived by the group. And so that's how they then realize, based on the equipment that they replaced and that they liked, what are these kids into, all right? And you can extrapolate, not from one school, but if you do this for 200 schools, you get an idea. Okay, yeah, Jay, it is Peter Drucker was one of the early people who formalized some of the thinking. There's another guy called Peter Schwartz who worked at Global Business Network who also did something. David, what are you asking? Yeah, I do. Right now, I don't do the survival training, but I'm actually doing one in about 2 weeks for an executive education client. Yeah, but I do this usually with executive groups, or sometimes when we with our full-time MBA group, and so whatever comes along, I'll still do this and go outside. It's a fun exercise, and it's not so much about survival training. Just to put this in the right context here, it's not that I mean, I can teach you how to whatever skin an animal and do all those things, but it is more about it's more about teaching people the ability to improvise, the ability to utilize equipment in different ways, to utilize your skills in a different ways, because that is the real kind of ability that survival experts know. It's not about the equipment of how to use it. It's that, if you see, let's say you find a tin can with sardines in it, right? A sardine can with sardines in. The obvious use of that would to open the sardine can in a survival situation and eat the sardines, right? But there's so much more that a sardine can do for you. It has the ability to be a metal container. You can boil water in it. The top of the sardine can, when you have this pull tabs, can be a very sharp knife replacement. The pull tab itself, when you open up a sardine can be broken down and makes a great fishing hook. You can actually use, if you have a sardine can with oil, you can use a little bit of thread, cotton thread, and improvise a candle out of it. You can even make the lid that you peeled off a little bit of a reflector, and so forth. So there's a variety of things that I teach people in this kind of sense of improvisation. And then when people get into a situation, that doesn't have to be necessarily a catastrophe, but even at business, you can then apply the same principles. Can I use the equipment that I've given in different ways? What about the people that I have in my organization? Do I really know what they can do? Most people only know what people can do related to the current job, but sometimes people have extra talents, have a background that you have not explored. All right. yeah, so yeah, shoot the questions. I'm happy to be here, but this is about it for the event. I see a couple of people still coming in, but I think we're good for the event. I think they have a recording, um, and yeah, thank you very much, everybody, for joining in, and thanks. I see some of my students who made it into the platform. Go around, explore. This is all brand new. Stay in touch. I'm on LinkedIn, guys. So if you want to connect, please do so. And for many of you, hopefully we'll see each other. If not in the spring semester, then hopefully at the end of the spring semester when we get this better under control. I would love to see people in the class again. All right. So excellent. Okay, guys. See you back in the conference. Thanks for joining.